So welcome back. Welcome to another live Q&A session of CSE 115. Hopefully you all are doing okay. You're healthy, staying safe, everything else. What we're going to be talking about today are doing some basic AJAX. So we're going to be talking through this application today. It's not a particularly exciting application, I admit, just to get our feet wet with AJAX. We'll be doing more of this on Wednesday, and then actually doing a real, actually kind of interesting application on Friday. So for today's initial application, what I've done so far is I actually went ahead and created a Python REPL. So everything here is going to be Python based. And in addition to that, I have gone ahead and started to create some of these files just to show you what's going on, because honestly, I figure watching me type is not particularly interesting. So what I have so far is just the HTML file that you can see up here. And so you can see this is a standard HTML file. It's got the HTML and /HTML at the beginning and the end. It's got one head region. Every HTML file can have at most one head region. It's got one body region. In this head region, I'm actually loading in two different JavaScript libraries. Now, when I say a JavaScript library, so far we've always been talking about a JavaScript library as code somebody else wrote. In fact, these libraries are code that I wrote, but I'm referring to them as libraries because by and large, they consist entirely of functions. The only code they have, there's a little bit, one line of code that isn't a function that is strictly around for me to, that is strictly there for me to be able to show you some output. So the first of these functions is AJAX.js, and this is where we have these AJAX GET request and AJAX POST request functions. Now, to be perfectly honest with you, the code here is utterly unimportant. I'm actually going to skip back to the HTML file. There's a lot of history about why the code is written that way. It really has to do with the history of how the web was developed and how browsers occurred. And it's long, it's complex, it's boring, and it's unimportant. So for this class, what I'm always going to tell you is don't worry about the code inside those functions. We'll never ask you about it. You will be expected to know how to use those functions. But when you have to actually write them, you should do what, frankly, I always do, which is go copy and paste the code from the last time I did that. And this is just a long tradition. In 115, about a year and a half ago, the first time we offered it in this incarnation, before we traded, I used to teach 116. He used to teach 115. We've traded, or one of the teachers of 115. And I know he actually copied it because it makes some choices that you don't necessarily have to make, but it works. So the more interesting function is chat.js. This is all the JavaScript code that I wrote for the current application. What the current application is going to allow us to do is send messages to our server, send messages from my computer, from my browser, to the Python server, which is Replit, to Replit, and then have it just look at that message and send something back that's appropriate, pseudo appropriate. So beyond that, in order to support that, I've got this chat area. So you can see div ID chat, and this is where we'll display the messages. And this BR right here, this is how you say there should be a new line. So this is the way that you do a new line in HTML. HTML actually ignores /n/r, all that stuff that we talked about being really weird. HTML has its own way of doing it. We then have a little bit of text saying message, and then we have this input. So this is an input element. And since it says type is assigned text, this is going to be a text box. So this is going to create a box that we'll be able to type into. It's got an ID of messages and then a break. And then we have a button. This is actually another kind of input, sort of, but it's specifically a button. And now there are two interesting properties that you can see in this HTML file. Body has this onLoad property and button has this onClick property. These are special properties that's defined by HTML that allows us to actually specify JavaScript code. So you can see this body element here uses this onload property, and that tells the browser when you're loading up this file, when this file is ready to be loaded up, call that request chat function, right? Execute this code, which is to call request chat, right? It's just a regular function call, just a bit of JavaScript. Similarly, the button has an on-click property. This on-click property gets used whenever anybody clicks the button, frankly. And it says whenever somebody clicks the button, what we want to do is call this send message function. Now, both these functions are in my chat.js file, so we'll look at that next. Now, remember that this is JavaScript code, and so this is going to be run on my computer, on my browser. And in fact, if you want, you can, at the top of this page, you can see the URL for the page. You'd actually be able to run this on your computer, on your browser also. And I'm just going to output that to the console because note that I've got two different pages here. I've got my page here for the browser, and note that this says anything here was run on my computer. And I've got over here the console from Python and saying anything here was run on Replit. And part of what I'm trying to remind you of, and one of the things that gets students into a lot of trouble once we get into AJAX, is we type it all into this one box, but in fact, two different computers are being involved in this application. My computer, the browser, the front end, and Replit server, the back end. That's Python code. Right now we're talking about the JavaScript code. So for that request chat, right, that's what gets executed when we load the page. You can see all it's going to do is call this AJAX get request function. So it's going to send a request to the server for data. That request is going to be sent to the path/chat. And now here is the trick about AJAX. To you, to me, to human beings, most animals out there, this response is going to come unbelievably fast. To the computer, however, that's not the case. This is actually going to take a while for that response to come back. And during that time, it's got nothing, it can't do anything. So part of what AJAX does, what makes it asynchronous, is it's going to allow the browser to continue running in case it does take a while. And so what we have to do is give it the name of a function. So here I said render chat. Note that that's this function down here. And if I double click on it, you can see it actually highlights the name up here to show that these two things are connected. What we're doing is we're saying, AJAX, once you get that response from the server, please call render chat. Go through and have that actually do this work. And so what this render chat's going to do, it's going to log that the browser received a message. Now the message that comes back, the way that we're sending this data back and forth is as a JSON blob, as encoded in JSON. So we'll get that JSON data. Since it's currently encoded in JSON and we want it to be usable in JavaScript, what we'll do is we'll call json.parse, turn it from that JSON blob to something usable in JavaScript, have it a message. We'll log that also just so we can see it. Then we'll get that chat div as an object, get whatever messages are there currently, right, using that inner HTML key. Remember, every non-input element has that inner HTML key. That's its contents. So we'll get whatever its contents are now. We'll add a new line, add our message, and then update what's displayed in the chat. And so just to show you how this works, when I send a message, I can type in a Python is a snake. And you can see it sent that message there. And I'm not actually running the server right now. It's got, it has an error in it apparently. I wasn't even supposed to be doing anything right now. Um, no, oh, hmm. It helps if I get rid of if I recreate the code that will run stuff. So now if I type Python as a snake, sorry about that, never do live demos. That's what I always tell my classes. You can see it sent something out. It got a response, right? The browser received, this is server talk. Now that's the JSON blob. It's got those quotes there because that's how we encode a string in JSON. So once we decode it, we get this is server talk as a string, and it just added it to my text. I could have other stuff. If I have JavaScript is nifty, it says that is browser talk. If we want to talk about well, frankly, the way it works, it's a very simple thing. I can say CSE is fun, and it actually just responds, and I imagine a few of you feel this way, boring. Honestly, it just looks to see if the word Python's there. It says this is server talk. The word JavaScript's in the input. It says browser talk. Anything else just responds boring. Just a little bit of example. But you can see that all of these messages are coming back. At the same time that's happening, it is using that code in here, right? Every time I hit that button, it calls send message. And what send message does is it gets that input element as an object. Remember, input elements use the value key. So it gets whatever I've typed into that box as a message. And that's what that message sent to server is displaying. It then sends the value of that input element to the empty string. And the reason why it does that is when I send something, right? When I send something, right? Having it erase that box and everything else just tells me, hey, this was received. It makes it easier to understand what's going on. So it just makes it a little bit nicer to use this as an application. It's not necessary. Once we do that, we call JSON.stringify. Remember, this is the JSON function in JavaScript that we can use to convert actual JavaScript data into a JSON blob. So if you look here, it always would say, right, message to send to the server, how's the weather? Blob that's actually sent, note that includes the quotes. And then we call AJAX post request. When we want to just request data, we call AJAX get request. To send data to the server, we call AJAX post request. And so what we're going to do is we're going to send it to /send. And then we have to specify the data that we want to send. So here it is to send, right? It's that JSON blob that we created. And then finally, anytime we make an AJAX get request or post request, the server is going to send us a response. So here what I'm going to do is call render chat. That is the same function I had for that get request. And I'm saying every time we send something out, I know it's going to send a message back. Let's just call render chat. That's what works. So this is the JavaScript side. This is the code that runs on my computer. Any questions about this? Okay. I don't see any questions coming in. So if you have them, please feel free to type in the chat. Otherwise, what I'm going to do is keep going and show you how this works on the server side, the code that doesn't run on my browser, but runs in Replit. So in the Python code, I've got a couple of import statements, right? We got to import bottle. That allows us to use the bottle library that defines our server. I have import JSON. That allows us to use that JSON library so we can do all the JSON encoding and converting from JSON easily. And then I'm going to create this variable quote_str. This is a string. This string contains just a single double quotation mark, the normal quotation mark. And I'm just going to use that because it's really confusing to look at. And so when I want to use it later on, it just makes things easier to read. So I've got now the sort of standard files that you can think about. I can get rid of this. We've got one file to serve up our HTML. And to serve up our HTML, we're just going to call bottle.static file like before. Have the name index.html. Root is equal to dot. That'll handle those requests for slash, just like before. Same idea for our JavaScript file. Now I have two JavaScript libraries I'm actually going to be using here, chat.js and ajax.js. So I need a separate function for each one of those since I'm handling them independently. And then when we get those incoming requests, right, they came to /chat. So note to handle those GET requests, those AJAX GET requests, it's in some ways similar to what we've been doing so far for all the requests for files, right? We have to annotate this function at bottle.route, and we have to specify what location we want it to come into. We define our function, and now we can write whatever code that we want, as long, and in particular, what we have to do is make sure that we return a string. Now, this could be limiting, the fact that we have to return a string, except we can do it in JSON. And since for JSON, everything's a string, this isn't a problem. So for the response right now, like I said, we're going to just do a very simple JSON AJAX call and response today. On Wednesday, we'll do a lot more with this chat. So my response is just going to be this string for Wednesday. Now, in order to send it, we have to encode it as a JSON blob. So I'll call json.dumps. And that will encode it as a JSON blob, send it out, and have it sent out when we return. So if I restart, remember we called that chat at the very beginning, you can see that that Replit server, that Python code, is going to send the text for Wednesday, but it'll do it in JSON. So it'll add those quotes. Now, that's the simpler version. The other thing that we have to do is handle those requests that come in when the user wants to type something. So that's what this @bottle.post does. So now here, in order to handle a post request, an AJAX post request, note I need to have @bottle.post, not @bottle.route. @bottle.route is for get, @bottle.post is for post. Again, I need to say where it's going to happen. So I say, if there's a post to /send, run this function. Now, the next line, next two lines is kind of ugly and yucky, and I apologize, but there's absolutely nothing I can do about it. It's just part of the bottle library. In order to get the data that was posted, we just have to use this line, bottle.request.body.read. And then to get it to be the actual usable JSON blob, we have to call whatever that result is, .decode. I wish I could give you some easy way of doing this or anything else. Literally, that's what you have to do. That's just a bunch of code you have to always use the same thing for, just the way it works. So whenever we type something, in case you didn't know, the Python language is actually not named after the snake, but named after the comedy troupe from the 70s, I don't know, before my time, Monty Python. So you can see that what happened is it received this blob, how about Monty Python? Note it had the quotes because it was still in JSON. When we decoded it, it got rid of that quote. And I just noticed, you guys might see this in a second also, that it has sending text here. What that's showing you is somebody else, somebody who is not me, just found and loaded up this page. Remember that we have the server running on Replit. I'm running that. That's where Replit's running that. One computer there. The client, that front end, the JavaScript and HTML, is run on the browser. That can be my browser. That can be any one of your or all of your browsers. In fact, on Wednesday, we're going to do a real chat app where we can actually share, chat, and send information back and forth. Yeah, well, someone just said, "Hi, Professor." You're going to see this in the thing. I don't know how long the delay is. And of course, a message back. Unless the message has JavaScript or Python in it, it just responds boring. Hi. So you can see that we can actually have lots of different people using our server all at the same time. That's not a problem. So you can see here's where I come up with that response. So it uses that find function. That find function it's called on a string, whatever we sent in. And what this says is if it can find the string Python there, it'll return the index if it found it. If not, it returns -1. Since for hi professor, for when I have, how about Monty Python? Python was there. It wouldn't be -1. It would come up with server talk. If it finds JavaScript instead, it'll return that as browser talk. Otherwise, it returns boring. And I just wanted to point out to you that there isn't any magic going on when we do this JSON encoding. In general, encoding something in JSON can be a little bit tricky. There's lots of different details to worry about or whatever else. If we have a simple string, just like right now, then what we can do is encode it ourselves. So if you remember, if we have that quotation mark, double quotation mark, our message, and then the end double quotation mark, that is a JSON blob. There's no magic there. And I can send that back just as easily. And so that's what I was doing here. That's kind of boring though. So what I'm going to do is actually use the normal JSON way of doing this. We very rarely encode it ourselves. I just want to point out to you that it was done. Send that back. And that's all we have to do for that send. Now the last part here, you can see I have just the message that prints out at the beginning. I also have this call to bottle.run. This starts up our web server, the host, normal port. Now you'll note on the side here in the console, it's not showing all those requests as they come in. And that's because I have quiet is assigned true. If I get rid of that, and I'm going to do that now, what's going to happen is you're going to see that we're going to see every request that comes in. Now, one of the most common errors that students make is they forget on those functions, which are supposed to handle post requests, to use that @bottle.post annotation. So I just want to show you what happens. So if we use @bottle.route, I'm now going to restart it. So you can see requests come in. And when that request came in for /chat, everything worked perfectly well. The system doesn't explode. But now what happens is, let me reload this page. If I send in a message, shouldn't be a comma there. I know grammar. And I hit send. Note that we do send a message to the server. You can see that this console shows that we're sending a blob to the server. If we look on the server, what we can see is that a post request here came in. That post request came in and it was /send, but nothing executed. There was no response. And that's because you can see that it's a post request. It says it right here. You can see it's /send. It's kind of being beaten up by my screen. There you go. But because I don't have a function responding to, even though I have a function at that location, it's not saying @bottle.post, it won't work. So when I have a return from the do chat, so every request we make in AJAX always responds with a response. Typically, this is going to be a JSON blob. It doesn't have to be, but it's going to be all the time. So that's just the way that we do it. So do chat here needs to return a JSON blob. And note, I'm just using JSON dumps here. Same thing as I did before. There's no difference in how a post request versus a get request has to respond. We can do whatever we want. They don't have to even do the same thing. It's up to what problem you're solving. So hopefully that answers your question. And the way they actually send those blobs back is they just return a string. There's no magic there. Whatever string they happen to return, that's what's going to be returned back. So one last fairly common error. Just let me get this restarted so you can actually see the results. Go back. Is remember in render chat here, I have it taking that JSON blob, turning it back into usable JavaScript data. One thing that students will frequently forget to do is forget to call json.parse. And I just want to show you what that would look like if we did that. So actually I have to restart again. Now I need to reload this page so it gets the new JavaScript. And you can see it's getting some, well, let me rephrase that. I didn't do this correctly. I commented out, but I need message to be assigned to something, don't I? So let's see what happens if we just assign message that data so that way I don't have to rewrite everything. Now let's reload it. And now what you'll see is that that response that we get back, note it still has the quotes attached. Those quotes that you see when the browser receives, for Wednesday, those aren't the quotes defining that as a string. Those are actually quotes inside the string. That's what JSON uses to define that, saying, hey, this is a little bit of string data, right? If we wanted to send something back that's a little fancier, so in our Python file, rather than having just a response of that, suppose our response were a object. Make the key, I can't think of anything, so we'll just make the key something, the string something, the response for Wednesday. And now all of a sudden it's dying because I tried to print out a string and a, there you go. So you can see now it's sending out that JSON blob, which is, the brace something for Wednesday. And when I reload this, again, it's going to get that whole string with everything. The brace, then the key, which is the string something, then a colon, same there, then the value, which is string for Wednesday, and a closing brace right here. So hopefully that makes sense. If I wanted to use this response in my chat.js, right, what I could do is, if I were to parse this out, I've got my message. Then here, since that message is now an object, the key was named something. If I do message.something, so I use that key. Reload my page. Note that it works perfectly well. So it got that object in, it's able to convert it. When it converts it, note that it's just an object, right? So before it received that string, so it can actually display it. Afterward, it's an object, and so JavaScript can't. So any questions you all have? Hopefully this goes through the basics of how we do these AJAX requests. We just call AJAX get request or AJAX post request. The one big thing to remember, if you take anything away from this, is that all of the work here is being done by this render chat function. And nowhere do you see a call to the render chat function. Instead, AJAX always takes care of it when we get that response back. So, any other questions that you all have? Anything else you want me to go over? Okay, I don't see any questions. So I'm going to say thank you all. Have a good evening. Have a good tomorrow. I will talk to you all, at least online, on Wednesday. Remember, if you do need any sort of help, there are office hours by the TAs. I guess I won't have any. No, I do have office hours before this on Wednesday. So for me, there's also Piazza that we're always active on. And thank you all, and talk to you later. Bye.